Hi friends, it's Shari. Today I'm creating a tropical themed Christmas card using lots of die cuts and some ink blending to make those die cuts really stand out. The sets I'm using for today's card is the Christmas palm tree, the small snowman from Build a Snowman, and then I'm also going to pull in some small die cuts from other sets, like these little hibiscus from the Magic Irish Tropical Leaves add-on, the sunglasses from Flamingo Floaty, and the little shell from Amazing Mermaid. Now you could also find those smaller images in stamp sets as well that's in your stash. So I've already cut out the pieces for my palm tree. For those little lights that are going to go on the string of lights, I cut them all out of pixie dust cardstock. So they're all white. And then I'm just going to add color with some Copic markers. So you can see that I put a piece of tape on the back of my negative piece here, and I popped two of those in there, and to color them with Copics, I'm just dabbing it. I'm just tapping with my marker. I'm not swiping it. I don't want that glitter to ruin the nib of my marker, so I'm just tapping it like stippling. So you can see I've made two yellow ones. I'm doing the same with the green, and for these I just stuck those bulbs right on my tape, which actually worked a little bit better. I'm going to make one more red one because I have 9 bulbs that I need, and then I will make 2 blue ones. So some really classic Christmas light colors that I'm using here. Now I can just add these to that string of lights. I cut that string from some narwhal cardstock, and I'm just putting a dot of glue on each of those light bulbs where those should go, and then I'm just picking that up and dropping them in place. So I'm kind of going in order: red, yellow, green, and blue, and then I'll repeat that. And then I actually decided to put it a little bit out of order at the end just so I didn't have 2 reds too close together. So you can see how nice and glittery those lights are. I think it looks super pretty. Now to move on to the other die cuts for this tree, I want to add a little bit of dimension. So I have this trunk here that's cut from some paper bag cardstock, and I'm adding some vintage photo distress ink using my ink blending brushes. And I also have this little tiny brush here. This is going to work perfect for these little coconuts. You could also use one of those finger daubers. And I'm just shading just one side of those coconut pieces. Now I'm moving on to the main part of my palm tree, and this little brush I found worked great just to kind of shade the underside of the leaves. Sometimes the blending brushes, or at least the ones I have, are a little bit larger, and this works to kind of keep it right at those leaves. You could also take a piece of paper and mask off that leaf below if you didn't have a little tiny brush like this, to just keep your ink on the bottom of the leaf that you're trying to shade. So I'm just working my way around, adding some Lucky Clover distress ink to this die cut, which is cut from some cilantro cardstock. And this just kind of gives it a little more dimension, and it's not quite so flat and one color. And you could see there I was also sort of pulling it towards the inside. And you can see how this looks a lot more dimensional than it did before I started. Now I'm going to assemble my palm tree, so just a little dot of glue at the top of the trunk, and I'll just sort of line that up with that center of all those palm leaves. And then I'm putting some dots of glue on the back of my string of lights. Some of these are going to overhang the side, but this way I make sure everything's tacked down nicely. And I tucked the bottom part of the string behind the trunk so it really looks like it's sort of wrapping around. And then next I'm going to add in those coconuts. So the glue is not quite dry behind my little lights here, and that's going to allow me to pick those up and slide those coconuts in behind those lights so that I don't cover up any of my pretty glittery Christmas lights that I created. I also have the little tufts of grass from the same die set, and I'm just doing the same thing that I did with the palm tree and adding a little bit of Lucky Clover to them so they're not so flat. Now to move on to my snowman, or I guess I should say my sand snowman. I've cut this from some craft cardstock, and then I'm adding some tea dye distressing. This is my favorite way to make kind of a sandy look, and I'll do the same to the ground as well. So I've shaded it a little bit more on that right side, but I did go around all the edges so that I get that kind of nice edging of that darker color. And then I'm taking a piece of craft cardstock that's cut to 4¼ wide, and I'm just cutting the top of it with a simple stitch hillside, and I'll do the same inking with that tea-dye distressing along the top. And I love using the craft cardstock because it kind of has a little bit of texture to it, but I want to add a little bit more. So I've pulled out my watercolors, and I'm starting with a dark brown watercolor, and I'm tapping it on my block so I get some really small droplets of that paint onto my cardstock, and you can see how that really gives it more texture and looks like sand. But I also want to add some lighter dots as well, so I'm doing the same thing with my white watercolor, and between the colors of the cardstock and the paint splatters, you'll get this nice textured sand look. Now I can add the face of my snowman here, and I've used some dark brown cardstock for that. And then for my sunglasses, this is from that Flamingo Floaty die set. I cut those from some black glitter cardstock so they kind of shimmer in the sun, which I think is a really fun look. I cut the little buttons for my snowman out of that same glitter cardstock so that they match the sunglasses. And then I also have these little hibiscus flowers. This was from that Tropical Leaves add-on for the Magic Iris. I've cut them from guava cardstock as well as some purple textured canvas cardstock. And then the centers are cut with some sunflower cardstock, and I'm just kind of assembling those in there. I'm not going to glue them onto my snowman just yet. I'm going to wait till I have him put onto the card base. But you can see there how that's going to look. Now for my background piece, I'm using a piece of Spiffy Speckles paper in that pretty blue color. I thought this would be great for a beachy sky. So I've just cut that to 4¼ by 5½, and I'm just layering that onto a card base. Then I can add my sand at the bottom. And before I glue my pieces down, I do want to add my sentiment. So I'm just going to continue on sort of assembling my snowman, but it's not glued down just yet. I decided to put those arms kind of coming out the front instead of tucked behind. I just liked that look better for this one. And then I'll go ahead and add these flowers. I kind of wanted to see where the tree fell before I added the flowers to the top of the head, just to make sure things were a little bit more balanced. And now you can see there I've kind of laid it out, but I haven't glued anything down yet because now I want to stamp my sentiment. And I want to do that before I glue everything down, just in case I mess something up. So I'm just going to put it up in the corner. That gives me the spacing to know where I want it to be. And then I transferred this over to my Misty and picked those stamps up with the door of the Misty, and now I can stamp them down in that corner. Now that that sentiment is there, I'm going to move on to adding my pieces to the card base. And actually, I really like how this kind of looks with just the tree, I'll have to be honest. It would make a great card even without the little snowman, but it's even cuter with the snowman. So I've added some thin foam squares to the back of my snowman, and I'm just going to pop him on there. And I don't want these little arms to get caught on anything, so I'm just putting a little dot of glue, and I'm going to tack the hands back to the back piece of the card. So they aren't popped up like the snowman, but it looks fine. In this way, they're not going to get caught on the envelope and tear, because we would hate for our snowman to have the arm ripped off. That would just be tragic. Now I'm adding those little tufts of grass that I inked up earlier. So I've got this big one that I'm putting over by the tree, and then there's a little one. This kind of gives it some more pops of color down here on the sand, which I like. And then finally, I have the little shells from the Mermazing Mermaid die set. Again, you can find shells in some other stamp sets as well to add to this card. And I've just cut that from some ballet slipper and some apricot cardstock. Now I'm going in with some stickles and adding some sparkle to the stamens on the hibiscus and the shells so that they match my Christmas lights a little bit. And then here is my finished card. And look how cute this little sandy snowman is with that palm tree and those glittery lights. I just think it is adorable. So here is another look at that card. And I hope this inspires you to look at your die cuts and mix them together and make a non-traditional Christmas card.